Everybody, I just want to welcome you once again very quickly. My name is Radia Barnes. I'm the president of the New York chapter of NAMIC, which is the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity and Communications. I'm going to turn this over to Carvel. This is an event that we have been working on since last year. It was Carvel's idea, and Marcus, where's Marcus? Marcus, come on up.
What's going on, everybody? Ooh, this sounds good.
So I'm going to turn it over to them, but I just wanted to welcome you guys. This is the first of one of two events that we're having for Black History Month. We're having a mixer at the end of the month. We have partnered with other urban professional development organizations called the Up Mixer. We're going to have a big party. You can check out our social media to find out more information. But I just want to thank you all for your continued support. This is our first event of 2020. And look at this turnout. I'm so happy. Thank you very much. Turn it over to the fellas now.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. My name is Marcus Gilmore. I serve on the Millennial Committee. Tonight's event is kind of focusing around the mission about with men and in the media space. We wanted to develop an event where we could bring men to the forefront, have them sit on the panel, have them have an open dialogue about what they're going through in the media space, because these are the guys that are on the front line right now. They're working in the industry. So we want to hear from them. We want to see what their lives are like each day that they go to work and through their day-to-day through life. So tonight, you may hear some things that you like. There are some things that you may not agree with, but always respect everyone and their opinions. That's the best thing we can do, because that's all we have in life. So now I turn it over to Carvel to introduce our moderator.
Oh, I can do it first.
You can.
There we go. I've been wanting to do this. My name is James Saho. I am part of the Pandora team, Client Services. Been here for a little over 3 years now, coming on 4. We're really genuinely excited to have everyone here. I know a lot of people have been working on this. It's not raining. I would have given you more kudos if it was raining and you still made it here, but thank you still. I'm also part of the employee resource group for MakeSafe, which basically brings around, it supports people of color and our allies, and especially this month, Black History Month, we're incredibly honored to have different vendors coming to the office, Black-owned businesses, and just support them sell their products. In addition to that, we have different panels and discussions all through the month, more to come, but really incredibly honored to have the NAMIC team here, along with all the panelists. It should be very helpful. So, thank you so much.
I'll be quick. My name is Mikael Beecher. I'm with Altice USA. You're probably more familiar with our consumer brand, which is Optimum. So we're one of the sponsors for this event, and we're really excited to do that. My role is I'm the director for community affairs and diversity and inclusion at Altice, and I also support our employee resource group. We have the lead of our Black Employee Affinity Network in the crowd, Shanicia, and I've been helping the group to celebrate Black History Month. And for this month, we've been focusing on history and horizon. History in the sense that we're celebrating the contributions that Black people have made to all industries, but particularly STEM. But, with Black History Month, there's a lot of celebration, but not a lot of conversations about what needs to happen, which is kind of the horizon space. Which is why we're sponsoring this event today, because we think it's important to have the conversation about what's next and how companies like ourselves can create environments where Black people thrive. So I'm excited to see what comes out of the panel, and thanks again for coming out today.
I'm good. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? My name is Carvel Wallace, and I'm the VP for the NAMIC-New York chapter. I want to thank you guys so much for coming out. I really do appreciate it. This event, it's the first of its kind for NAMIC and NAMIC-New York. I had a vision, myself and Marcus, about a year ago, because we've done so many events in the past, and I felt like they were all, geared towards women, and, we talk about Me Too, we talk about the conversation there, but wanted to have a conversation where the men were involved. Being a member of NAMIC for over 10 years now, I've kind of felt like I wasn't able to have that sort of conversation. So now we're doing it today. So I'm super excited about it. So from there, I just want to tell you guys a little bit more about NAMIC. Like Radia said, NAMIC is the National Association of Multi-Ethnicity and Communications. We do a number of panels, not just this one. Also want to, put my membership hat on, and we also have our membership co-chair who's in the back who can tell you more about NAMIC. We have members-only events such as speed mentoring, and also our job board, which is for members only. So if you have any questions about NAMIC, please feel free to reach out to myself or Melanie, who's in the back. She can tell you guys more. But right now, I do want to introduce and get this started for you guys. I want to introduce Drew McCaskill to you, who is moderating for tonight. Drew is currently at SiriusXM. I got my paper here because he has a long bio. He is currently a culture and economics contributor at SiriusXM for Karen Hunter on Urban View Channel 126. He is a culture analyst, inclusion champion, and marketing executive who most recently led the U.S. consumer marketing over at Nielsen. Andrew is regularly called on to give consumer and cultural analysis from the New York Times, USA Today, Forbes, Fortune, and Adweek. He is also a marketing expert for BET's digital series, The Glam Gap, and is an investor and culture consultant with 2 early-stage tech startups. He is a Mississippi native, living in Harlem currently with a degree from Morehouse College and the Gozziata Business School at Emory University. So without further ado, would like to intro Drew McCaskill.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. I feel like I left one Sirius office and came to Pandora Sirius, so I'm excited about that. I just got off the air. I'm super excited to be here, particularly about this. I spent the majority of my career in media and in the communications. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm always curious about how we decide, what the conversations are going to be. We talk a lot about segmentation all the time, and people will oftentimes have an entire panel about millennials, and we'll have an entire panel about women. We'll have an entire panel about Gen Z, etc. And I often feel like that the story arc about Black men oftentimes gets lost in that shuffle, right? And so I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I'm excited to bring forth the rest of the panel. Brad Smith, who is anchor of Cheddar. Brad, yeah, come Brad. Brian Norris, Senior VP Direct to Sales, NBC Universal. Quentin Hayes, Executive Deputy Commissioner, New York Citywide Services. Victor Arias, Senior Account Supervisor, it doesn't say where, Victor, at Edelman. Jordan Evangelista, Sales Research at Pandora. And Kobe Brown, filmmaker from Fatherless to Fatherhood. And hey, guys. Well, welcome everybody on this panel. And we're going to play a clip from Kobe's film. So take a look.
Father means a protector of his family, provider, and gives lots of love and wisdom and knowledge, especially about God. That's what a father means to me.
When I brought my daughter home, I remember thinking 2 of us left, 3 of us are coming back.
If you don't have a father figure in your life, it's definitely going to be difficult.
One of my closest friends has made the decision to keep her daughter away from her father. I'm always encouraging her to rethink that decision, because while she thinks that she's doing something detrimental for the father, really the only person that's being hurt in the situation is her daughter.
No matter how bad the woman is, if you leave your child, there's something wrong with you.
In our communities, Black communities, the incarceration rate is really high. I'm 38 years old and I managed not to ever be arrested. And I'm still that in him. Don't become accustomed to thinking that it's a part of our manhood to be harassed by police, to get arrested, to go into the liquor store, to test drugs. We don't follow that norm at all.
It's my son, he got cancer at 14 years old. It was just, I didn't know what to do.
How do you learn how to deal with men if you never had a man in your life to learn what a man is supposed to be like towards you, how he's supposed to treat you?
I guess if it was reasonable, he'd do anything for us.
I would catch a grenade.
a grenade would bite you.
So that's when I knew that the time has come. She's definitely a teenager now, and these are the things. She's going to be dating guys, and I guess the best thing you could do when in that situation is find out who this kid is.
I give them things if they earn it, but I just wasn't given things because nothing's worse than raising a spoiled brat, because I know a lot of guys who I come up with who were given this, that, and the other, and you look at them now, it's like they don't even know how to succeed in life because they was handed things so much.
I think that it can be summed up with a good father is one that is there and is one that cares. He's there and he cares. Because if he cares, he's going to want to do the things to become a better father. He's going to want to be engaged. He's going to want to take constructive criticism. He's going to look at his weaknesses and try to make them strengths, because he's there and he cares. He's going to do all that he needs to do to really try to bring out the best in his role as a father and to be active and to be engaged. And so that's what I would say a good father is. He's there and he cares.
So everyone, I'm not going to ask all of the gentlemen on the panel to read off their bios and all of that because we will be here all night. There's a bunch of folks on the stage. I think. I was like, so what I do want to do is I want to just jump straight into it. We're gonna talk a lot about overcoming barriers through the power of inclusion and what it means to be Black and male in a lot of the spaces in which we occupy. And so one of the first things I really want to talk about is everybody talks about as in African Americans, our impact on culture, right? Jay-Z says that nothing moves without us, and at every meeting I'm in, we talk about African Americans controlling $1.3 trillion. If we were an economy, we would be the 15th largest economy in the world. We're driving culture not only in the U.S., but we're driving culture all over the world. But a lot of the images that we see in a lot of the imagery around Black men is at best problematic, right? And so as men in media, my question for you is, when images of Black masculinity show up, how does it impact you specifically in how you move through your role in whatever your arena is? Whether those images are positive or negative, can you kind of give us an instance of where when images of Black masculinity show up in media or in culture, that you feel like you've had to either respond to it or somehow disprove it, or how does that cultural impact you and how you move through the world?
And I know this is specific to men, but I think each of us, men, male as well as female, have an obligation to address those images by creating the exact opposite if they are the opposite of who we are or how we want to be represented. And while we can't always police or control what's happening externally, we can control and police what's happening internally and our response to these things. So there's so much. There's a plethora of things that present us in a negative light. And if we don't have the resources to change that, we can definitely change who we are and maybe double down on our commitment to providing an example for others.
Hi, Jordan, by the way. I work at Pandora and Sirius, and I'm on the sales research team. I'm really happy to be here. So actually, going back to my childhood, right? I'm gay, and I didn't see anyone on television who was gay and Black. And for me, that was big because I was still in the closet, and I had no one to look up to. Nowadays, you actually see a lot of narratives surrounding the LGBT community and of LGBTQ men of color, particularly. For me, a lot of it has been just showing up and being my authentic self every single day. And talking a lot about the issues that we're seeing in the media and like every day engaging with these conversations about what's happening and what's going on every day. Taking those everyday instances of ignorance that we still see around everywhere, and you stick up for your community, you stick up for other marginalized people. Like, how am I standing up for Black women? How am I standing up for the LGBTQ community, those with disabilities? So I think a lot of it is actually like what we're looking for in the world, we also need to put back into other marginalized groups. And so for me, a lot of what I try to do every day is I try to show up as my authentic self, to then disprove those notions and assumptions that are all over in the media about Black men and really uplift other people in other marginalized communities.
But can I stop you there, because I want to be able to keep it real a little bit too, in that what about that pressure of Black excellence though, right? Like, is it our responsibility to be the anti-stereotype then at work every day or in spaces every day, just because? Is that our responsibility?
It's definitely not our responsibility, but I think it's still important. Like I said, like you owe it to yourself to show up every day authentically into your own life. But to your point, though, we are not responsible solely for that. By having these everyday conversations with people who are ignorant, quite frankly, or to bring up these issues every day, that's how we are able to like change the collective consciousness that of the imagery of what it's like to be a Black man. Just having those honest conversations.
And I'd add, I'm Brian Norris from NBCU. It's our responsibility to show people that we work with that, like, all Black people, all Black men aren't just one thing, right? That we're nuanced, just like everybody else, right? So I take a whole lot of pride in sharing my story with people that I work with, right? I'm from Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, went to high school, and it's not the Brooklyn that you know right now. It was a different place. And I grew up in an environment that wasn't necessarily the safest environment. But, part of my story is that, I played sports and sports allowed me to leave New York City and go to undergrad and play sports at a collegiate level. But then, part of my story is really about overcoming obstacles that might have been put in my way. So, and I tell stories at work, right? I tell stories to people that work with me and work for me. And one of the stories I've told some people is that, when I was a senior in high school, I was in a car with a couple of guys that I played football with, and they were about to go rob a store. And they were like, B, you should probably get out the car because you basically have a future. So we're about to go do something. And so I got out the car, and it's instances like that I think shape who I am right now. But then I can also tell a story because they might be thinking, oh man, you grew up in a really bad neighborhood. Like, how'd you make it from there? Yeah, I grew up in a it wasn't so bad, but different than where they grew up. And then I talk about my life and how I got into the business and how I grew up in the business and how I ended up getting an Ivy League MBA, right? And being able to represent something that's different than what they see on television. Because a lot of times, and many of us know that this is the case, like, we're the only ones in our office, right? Or there's just like a handful of us. And so it's about telling the story and telling stories. And part of the story that I tell, that is part of my story that I tell whenever I speak to large groups, is when I first started in the business, I was 22 years old, and I started at Lifetime Television. I was a sales assistant, fresh out of undergrad. The first week on the job, the head of HR, a Black woman, sort of reminded me of my mother. She said, I want to take you to lunch. And I'm like, great, she must take all new hires to lunch. So we're walking to lunch, and she's like, I don't take all new hires to lunch. And she says, I want to let you know that this company is 17 years old, and you're the first African-American person in ad sales. And so at that moment, like, I felt like this huge responsibility, because she was like, if you mess up, they're not going to hire another for a long time. And she was just keeping it, 100 with me. And so I felt a responsibility, and that responsibility has grown as I've moved within my career. And that responsibility actually, as I've gained political capital in certain in companies that I work for, in circles that I'm in, that political capital has allowed me to be my authentic self and actually make sure that I'm not the last person, that there are people coming in behind me. So it's really, to answer your question, yeah, you have to be your authentic self, but you have to show people that you work with and that you're around that just like there are nuances in every community, our community has nuances as well, and you can't paint the entire community with one brush.
I'll just add to what Ryan said, because I think that it is a lot of responsibility, but with a lot of responsibility, the pressure is on you, right? So every day you are literally wearing a lot of pressure, so you're not sometimes being your most authentic self. So one of the things I wanted to bring and call to attention, you talked about the 1.3. It's a number that we don't really talk about that much. And I'm going to actually talk about it from like a recruitment aspect, right? How many of us actually see either advertisements of owners and operators that look like us? Whether it be at your company, managers, directors, CEOs, vice presidents, how many of you actually see an actual picture or an advertisement of a picture like you, that looks like you? And I think that's where we can start, right? And so a lot of the recruitment dollars that we spend, specifically the city, and I can only speak for the city right now, is that we're trying to focus that a little bit more on ethnic media, right? So can I get someone that looks like you so that I can show, not that you can be a police officer, not that you can just be a firefighter, but you can also be the deputy mayor, right? You can also be a city council member. You can also be a commissioner. And I think that's where we can start to actually highlight some of the great work that we're doing, but also when people see that they can actually be that person one day. I'm reminded of, I probably everybody has seen the Obama picture where he bent down and there's a little boy that was touching his head, right? That went viral mainly because we showed that picture as like literally that young boy said, when I walk in, I want to be like you. And the president said, well, what do you mean you want to be like me? He's like, I can be president. That little kid said that he could be president. You would have never heard of that before, but you can hear about it now. And he has a visual representation of what he could be. And so I think to answer your question, both about the 1.3 trillion and also kind of piggyback what Brian says about responsibility, we have a lot of responsibility, but I think that we have other levers and other vehicles that we can use to kind of lessen that burden a little bit.
If I can add on to what he mentioned about showing a visual responsibility, growing up, I took a investment class in high school, and our teacher's idea of teaching the class was turning on CNBC, and you would watch Jim Cramer for 30 minutes go off, and his panel of typically all-white male guests, and occasionally you would get finally some gender diversity in there, but you wouldn't see people of color. And I think with that, it frustrated me not only that my parents were paying for a crappy education from this teacher, but also because I was looking up at something that I could envision myself doing one day, but didn't see anybody else who looked like me doing that. So eventually, you kind of figure out how can you get to that stage so that nobody else who is in high school, who wants to go that route, ever has to feel that same way. And now you fast forward to many years, and to come back to your question, is the pressure all on you? The pressure's not all on you, singular, but because there's still only a handful of us now, and you could probably name all of them, John Ford, Charles Payne, Mark Crumpton, Bloomberg, CNBC, Fox, not necessarily in that order, who are the only kind of representation that you'll see as of this point in time. Frank Holland, I know you guys just brought him over too, and Rahel. But it's expanding, and it's still around 10 right now. And so to show something different, that we are more than just interested in talking about sports or talking about entertainment, that we can talk business, and we could do it so eloquently and knowledgeably about all of the same stories, and perhaps giving you a different perspective than you've thought of for the past 30 decades. And we can bring that to the limelight and consistently across different beats. Get pulled up into politics coverage last week. I don't cover politics. I stay away from it vehemently. But to be a person that somebody can call on at that time and say, hey, we know you will research, we know that you'll prepare for this, that actually shows somebody else who's watching, who is 20 years in the making right now, who says and clicks on for 2 seconds and sees myself or somebody else who is covering politics that looks like us. They say they look prepared, I can prepare like that one day, and I can do better. I don't want somebody to match me. I want somebody to do better than me, so more people keep coming up afterwards as well.
Hey guys, I just had one quick thing to share. My name is Victor Arias. I am not black. So I can't speak to that experience. I know that the questions were very much kind of filtered through that lens, but I am bicultural, bilingual. I'm a Mexican American, Latino that grew up in Texas. And so I've definitely experienced some things on my way, through the communications industry. But I think, Drew, going back to your question, I think the one maybe common thread that I started thinking about was that we don't want to ever be reactive to like what our identity is. And so for me, as somebody that kind of straddled cultures a lot, I feel like when I was younger, people would say, "Oh, well, you're Mexican, so like, help us with this Hispanic strategy." And I'd be like, okay, well, I can also just do the work and be a good employee and be a professional, but you get pigeonholed sometimes. So I think, and I'm hearing some similarities. So it's like the last thing you want to do is have somebody else control that narrative of what your identity is and what you can bring to the table as a professional. So I just wanted to call that out. And then in terms of like seeing yourself in media and those images, I think it's very different for me. I think I don't even see anybody. Like we're just faceless right now. There's even more of a lack of representation, unless you're watching all those narco shows, right? Like those are pretty hot. But so, like not even seeing that, I think there's a deeper problem for our community. But I think that I'd love to hear more from you guys on what you have to say about that too, because I think because of that, you are more willing to take on that burden, even if it's not merited, right?
So I do want to readdress that too, because one of the things you said, Brad, was about being able to see things and see representation and what it looks like for the next round of professionals of color, male professionals of color coming into the business. I know for me, when I was in my career in PR, there was like, I was in my 30s before I had another black male mentor who was in the profession, and so in terms of somebody who looks like me. So if I'm curious from the gentleman across the board on the panel, what do you say to young men of color who want to get in the business you're in right now? How do they, what are you thinking that their prospects are, and are you doing any things or seeing any things that maybe this group could support that will help those young men of color get into the spaces where you are now?
So when I speak to young men of color, quite honestly, the fact of the matter is on the business side of television or media, I'm finding that it's not incredibly hard for people of color to get in at the entry level. Right? People get in, and look at your own companies. Most companies are pretty well diverse, like at the entry and then second up level. But then when you get to like the offices and the executive level, we start to churn out. So I focus a lot of my efforts through my company and through a nonprofit that I'm on the board of creating sustainable programs for young people of color who are 3, 4, 5 years into their career to get into mid-management, get into executive positions, right? Because there's something that happens within that second and third level where we churn out, right? And we all can think of a person in our head who just sort of left the business because of a variety of reasons. And what we boil it down to is that people leave because they don't have great mentorship. And mentorship, for me, means working with a stakeholder that has your best interests as a priority. And I think it sometimes can be a bonus if that person looks like you. And then we don't have access to training, like the sort of on the job training. And then it's like, we've all heard the term like, it didn't work. It wasn't a good fit. Does a good fit mean that I didn't go play beer pong with you? Like, what does that mean, right? Do I just not fit in the office, right? So I've been and when I got to NBC, I've been at NBCU for 2 years now, and literally the line was down the hall when I first started of people knocking on my door saying, I heard you're here, can you help me? And so I've taken it upon myself to work with people of color and people who could be seen as marginalized within a corporate environment to make sure that they're getting sound advice, right? Just great advice. Like I get great advice. I have a mentor in the business, and when I got my job at NBC, I called him, super transparent, laid out everything. He gave me wonderful advice. So I recommend that people find mentors that they can get great advice from. But like I'm super laser focused on people getting people to those mid-management, getting them skilled up to get into mid-management and senior leadership positions, because I don't think that we win long term in the business side if we are not in a position to make decisions, to help have a seat in the boardroom, to help inform creative business strategy, M&A, long-term thinking around the growth prospects around the business. So that's where I've been really focused.
I'm curious too. 92% of the population growth that's happened in America in the last 15 years has come from communities of color, African American, Hispanic, and Asian consumers. Those are the people who are listening to media, watching media, consuming media. Those are the folks who are constituents. Those are the folks who are who are trying to figure out what to do with their money and all of those things, right? What are you seeing in response to when you're in rooms to try to engage that group of people? Is there a mandate to engage communities of color, and how are you gentlemen responding to that mandate? How are you responding to it? How are you seeing it show up?
Let's turn this way. Sweet. I think a few things. I mean, number one, to speak to the economics of it as well. I mean, 2/3 of our economy is consumer driven, and for us to have as much influence as we do and still not be involved in the conversations is jarring. So there's kind of two frames of mind you can approach it with. You can wait until somebody asks you, and then you can insert every single thought that you've been preparing. That's one. And you'll probably drive yourself crazy just waiting for that opportunity, because sometimes those opportunities, frankly, just don't come. And then the other frame of mind is to kick down the door of the rooms where you want to be involved in the conversations. And that, perhaps a little bit more effective. You might scare and rattle a few people, but I think in showing your intent and how you want to reposition the company, reposition the messaging or the campaign that's being run, it will show, number one, your work ethic, especially if you're walking in and busting down the doors and saying, ideas on the table, and this is the market that you need to address. And if you address this market well, then this market's also going to gravitate towards what they're wearing and what they're buying and those consumer patterns. Because at the end of the day, the companies are trying to figure out how to best grow out their business continuously. And if that growth comes from a segment that they have marginalized previously, then they're going to want that thought, that idea coming from somebody who knows how to tap into that segment or the sector of the market.
I think, the answer to this question really depends on one's lived experience. My background is the world of recorded music. So I got my start in my career working for Queen Latifah. And the reason I think that's important is because she grew up in the same hometown as me. So I think when we use music as an example, and I can even point it to television, a lot of the greatest opportunities have come about in the corporate space as a result of there being this niche market that someone of color has decided to cater to, and then a corporation sees the success of that market and decides they want a piece of the market. When we talk about the entire black music industry, of course, there was Chess Records, there was Stax Records, there were all these regional record companies, but Berry Gordy really created the model with Motown, and then every major corporation decided they want market share. So as benefactors of that, scenario, I think it's important and incumbent upon men of color, women of color who have these opportunities to work in these spaces, A, to bring people in, but B, to invest in things that are going on outside of these corporations and advise and inform those who are operating outside of the corporations of how to best grow and build their businesses, because the true talent pool is going to be looked after and cultivated by people who are most connected to it. Meaning that the white guy who's 45 years old and lives in Long Island is not coming to East Orange or Brooklyn or the Bronx to give an opportunity to a 17-year-old black kid the same way he or she would if they lived in Long Island. And that's, is it inherently racist? Is it deliberately racist? Probably not. It's just proximity. So we have an obligation based on our proximity to give opportunity and information to those who are interested in whatever our field is.
Yeah, I think so. At Edelman, we're a PR agency, and we have a lot of different clients that maybe think that they're ready to engage with multicultural audiences. Sometimes they'll straight up ask for it, like in an RFP. It'll say like, this needs to include a AA and Hispanic strategy. But I find a lot of times, either if you're proactive about it or responding to it, you need to be armed with the right data. So a lot of what you're talking about, Drew, is you kind of have to take an extra step to educate clients, whoever's asking for it, about the imperative, the business imperative, all the numbers we're talking about from an economic standpoint, but also from a consumer behavior standpoint as well. I mean, the youngest generations are the most diverse we've ever seen. So that trend is not going to stop. To your point, you talked about population growth, demographic shifts, and you can even drill down based on what markets, priority markets you're looking at too, because that also differs, right? So anyway, I think if you arm yourself with the right data and think about it as almost you have to take an extra step to educate people asking about it, that's the only way that you're going to see change.
So Victor mentioned something that I think is kind of interesting in that previously where he said that you don't necessarily always want to just be given the U.S. Hispanic Project, right? And I know in my career, for the first 15 years, I was always like, I want to be on the general market stuff because I don't want to just do the black stuff. Now I'm in 20 years into my career and I want to do the black stuff all the time. You know what I mean? And so I think about how people of color are in these spaces, particularly in media and in advertising, just sort of, on the stage, your thoughts around is it a chicken or an egg thing? Do you feel like that, hey, one of the best pathways in is to double down on what your lived cultural experience is and go in and say, hey, I'll take the Alvin Ailey PR project, right? Because, hey, I'm black. Or should, do you say, hey, I'm going to only do the tech stuff. And then, so that I, the black guy, don't get pigeonholed into doing the black stuff or the Hispanic stuff. All of your experiences are different. I'm curious to hear, your thoughts on, that in terms of the marketplace today.
I'd say that, as far as like being given like the quote unquote black stuff, first off, like I want a seat at the table, right? So, and when I say seat at the table, it doesn't mean that I want to be part of like every decision-making process, but if there's something that impacts my community, I want to be like, hey, I want to be able to be empowered to say that's not the right path for me to go. But I also think it's a problem if they're only giving me those projects, right? So I want to be a part of everything. Like I don't think that these paths are mutually exclusive. I think that we can look at, and we should look at, how certain demographics within the population should be marketed to in an authentic way with people having a seat at the table. Because if you look at companies that end up apologizing for an insensitive ad or something, it's normally like 100% of the time it's because there wasn't somebody with a seat at the table or they didn't feel empowered at that table. And so it's incredibly important that people who are working on these projects, myself included, have a varied and diverse experience, skill set to actually give guidance on what might be the right way to speak to a community. But then also, how do you market just a mass marketed product like an iPhone?
So I would just quickly add, I actually find that my influence is greater when I'm actually not on the team. When I'm working on something other than kind of what I identify as, I feel like people come to me and ask me my opinion, and that's taking it a little bit more seriously than if I actually was on that team. Because I oftentimes think that we put together teams to tactically attack a problem. And it's literally, I want you to get this done and get it done versus actually thinking about the impact that you're going to make. And so I find that to be true in respect to my job.
I'll just add one thing. Like, I think, because I took a different path. I worked at the Hispanic shops and then got my way into general market. But I think that you can do it either way. It's just like what path is most comfortable with you, because I think for all of us, the extra burden is also having to be, you're expected to be the expert of your culture for everybody. Like, there's just no, that's what it is. So even the way you're talking about, like, people still tap you to understand that market or whatever insight it is, like, you're still going to be asked to be the expert for everybody. So I think it is important. I think it's something we have to deal with. But I think, like, it's on us to prove we can do both.
Interesting that you say that you're expected to be the expert for your entire culture. Jordan, you say you show up at work authentically. You're a double minority, right? In this media space, that you're both a black man as well as a gay man. So how do you sort of operate in a space where you have sometimes you're a part of two cultures that sometimes have some very interesting and problematic sometimes engagements with each other?
Yeah, so I am actually a part of both SiriusXM, Pandora's mixtape community, and our Pride community. So mixtape is for all our people of color, and Pride is for our LGBTQ folks and allies. And for me, it's all about, like I said, like coming to work authentically. And after all of the hurdles that I've crossed in my life to become comfortable with who I am as a person, that's like one of the most important things for me, is to just show up exactly as I am, and to not gloss over my identity, and not to like lessen my identity at work, because oftentimes if you feel like you're not comfortable in a work setting and you are within, like, you are a double minority or you are marginalized on different dimensions, sometimes you kind of diminish your own identity and you don't show up fully authentic yourself. So for me, you did mention there is that conflict within certain communities, and it's a conflict that I've seen both in my personal life and my professional life, and how I've overcome that was to, like I said before, really try to tackle the ignorance head on sometimes. So within the workplace, trying to talk to my colleagues about how they should be talking about people of color and LGBTQ folks, and the types of stereotypes that we hear in the communities, like educating folks on why certain things can be problematic when talking about specific marginalized communities. And yeah, it's really tough sometimes to show up and to be authentically yourself with being marginalized on different dimensions.
I'll never forget when I first got to a previous company. My CEO asked me to lead our Pride organization globally, and I was the youngest senior vice president at that time in our entire network, and I got a lot of pushback I got a lot of feedback, I'll say, from our Black employee network, and said, "So y'all gonna take the youngest Black executive that we have, and he's gonna be the Pride leader and not the Sable leader or the Black employee group leader?" And I had to really, for the first year and a half, really double down on my Blackness at work, because I was the global leader for our Pride organization, and my Black colleagues were side-eyeing the crap out of me, right? And so I ask you that question because that dual identity is something that black men or men of color don't necessarily have to do in the way that black women have to do every day. You know what I mean? That they have a double, a double path to walk or whatever. And I think it's interesting sometimes with the rare occasions when the men in our community have to do that as well in not necessarily the same way, but very different ways. We can't talk about being men of color in professional environments without talking about sort of the responsibility that we feel or that we sort of share with women of color who are in those environments too. My perspective has always been that we're stronger together, right? But I'm curious as to, if there are instances of where you've been very intentional about partnering with women of color in environments for mutual progression. Are there any instances or examples where you can kind of share where you've done that and been really intentional about those sort of tides raising both boats?
I think it happens a lot in the newsroom because there are so few of us. So if there's a story that we want to cover, we need to partner up and say, hey, let's crush this story. Let's make sure that we're covering it from all angles. That way we're giving the rest of the executives, the editors-in-chief, programmers, producers, a reason to get excited about the next time we want to cover a story that impacts people of color, people whose stories have been marginalized before. And it is an advocacy for women, particularly. For women of color, I think a lot of us up here would not be as strong as we are in some of our positions without women of color doing so much work within the organizations. Y'all are more vocal than we are, like hands down. And that's what starts conversations. Sometimes, honestly, I know I can be timid in raising my voice about something, but I've got a few powerful women back at the office as well that I know we partner on a lot of stories, a lot of projects, and not holding back thoughts. But I know if you dive in, I'll be right behind you because we need to continue to support each other in an effort to make sure that we're covering more of the stories that so often would not get raised to the national scene or even sometimes on the local scene as well.
I think it's important for black people to be united in any workspace. But one thing that I'm noticing, a trend that I've noticed, is not only is it important for us to educate one another about our blackness and how it fits in the context of where we're working, but I'm a little bit fearful about, I won't say millennials, but almost Generation Z, because I think there's a generation that's coming up that really doesn't relate to their blackness in the same way that those who may have been born in the 70s or 80s may have, because they've lived during a time that is a lot more diverse and don't understand the sacrifices that were made in order for them to be where they are. My older cousin once said it in a way that I never thought about. He has a son who's 26 now, and he said to me when his son was about 14, these are the kids whose Asian friend and white friend, excuse me for using this language, they all call one another their N-word. And so, when I was growing up, anyone who wasn't black didn't have the right to use the N-word. But now we're in a workspace where there are kids who are 20, 21, 22 years old who don't see the problem with that. So if anything, I think it's important to constantly reinforce and educate one another, regardless of age, of what our shared history is and what the implications of that history are. And if I can even share a really short story, there was a record that once came out within the last 5 years where Lil Wayne makes a derogatory reference to Emmett Till. And the chairman of the label that put that record out, Lil Wayne was a guest on it. I went to his office and spoke to his assistant, who at the time was probably well into her 40s, and I said, I need to speak to him because there's this record where Lil Wayne mentions Emmett Till. And her response was, well, was he a football player? So you have a woman who's in her 40s working around music that impacts and reflects people of color with a chairman who is also black, and there's no sensibility, understanding, or historic knowledge. So to the extent that a woman in her 40s cannot know who Emmett Till was, it's very important to impress upon someone who's just coming out of college into the workspace, or someone who's in high school, who our people are, what our history is, why we are there, what it means to be there, and who created the opportunities for us to be there.
At more of a question, but how do we transition that history and that knowledge to those that right? So I think that's a great example. But when I think of, like, there are several historic. I had a chance to go down to Montgomery, Alabama, to go to the Equal Justice Initiative, which I recommend everybody participating go. It was amazing. But when I look at all the history, half of that stuff I didn't know anything about. Some of that I saw where there are people that were lynched that were in my county that I knew nothing about. And so I think part of it is also when we talk about media and entertainment, what is our role in kind of thinking through how we share that information? Because it's not what we see on TV every day. And when you have these folks that are coming up and their history is shared history. And so I see a lot of folks that we're so worried about everybody else's history that we don't even learn our own history because it's not being taught in the classes. And so Black History Month is one of the few months that we have that we're really focusing on kind of thematic topics and kind of talking about our history. But again, my question is, like, how do we transition? What role does media play in making sure that that history is not lost over time? Because we're talking about years.
I think one of the things we have to do is demand better as a community of consumers, right? Is that because I love the movie to death, but Waiting to Exhale is not a Black history story, right? So if you look at the Black History Month programming that all of us are watching, that all of us are seeing every single, like for the last 30 days, that anything Black is not necessarily Black history, right? We should just be demanding better. I think about the same thing. I had a conversation with my Hispanic agency maybe a year and a half ago, and I said, I don't want us to only talk to Hispanic consumers during Heritage Month, right? Like, that's the last thing I want to be accused of as a Black person who controls the checkbook for multicultural. I think we've got to, as a consumer group, demand better, but we also have to think about the fact that storytelling is our community responsibility, right? Particularly intergenerationally. Intergenerational storytelling is something that is slowly slipping away from us in a way that has happened almost rapidly. I mean, I say slowly slipping away from us, but I think you're absolutely right about the responsibility to take our history seriously, and some of the intersectionality of wanting our kids to be mainstream and wanting them to get along with everybody else and wanting them to be not picked on for their culture, so we don't send them, to school with ethnic food in their lunch boxes anymore, or all of those things. That there's a cost to that to a certain extent, and it shows up in some very weird places, like Black kids being okay with non-Black kids using the N-word. Part of it is an intergenerational storytelling thing, and consumers demanding better. We talked a lot about representation. I keep hearing us talk about representation, and we just talked a little bit about intersectionality and how that shows up in really interesting ways, as well as potentially maybe even detrimental ways when intersectionality shows up. But being, to be socially acceptable for minorities in terms of big conversations and pop culture and all of that, I think that one of the issues that shows up a lot is the conversation around self-care. Women of color have been talking about self-care, and it's been on the cover of their magazines for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. We rarely hear men talk about self-care in open forum in the way that women have become very comfortable with. We rarely hear men talk about therapy as much as our counterparts, our female counterparts. I'm curious as to how the group feels about the pressures that are uniquely on men in the spaces that we're in, and what self-care looks like for you as a male professional of color that may be helpful to this wide group of professionals of color?
I think self-care in the form of sitting down with a professional is about as important to me as getting the haircut, although it's a little bit more costly than getting a haircut every week. But I think it's important. It's something that I got into, that I be more specific, therapy about 2 years ago, and you never realize how many things that you experience throughout your life that you suppress and that you act out upon in ways that you never realize. And then you begin unpacking these things and get a better understanding of not only you, but also the people who were around you, raising you. I think for such a long time, especially working in an industry where we take culture and commodify it, a lot of dysfunction was seen as, okay, that's part of the packaging. You know, see my friend Rick Brown here, he worked at Elektra Records. They had Old Dirty Bastard, and Rick can probably share with you, probably one of the most dysfunctional people you would ever meet, but his behavior was seen as, oh, Dirty's just crazy. No, Dirty needed help, you know? So I think it's very important, and I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. It's very key because it also helps you get in touch with something else, which I think is important regardless of what industry you're in, is your ultimate purpose. A lot of these questions we ask about diversity and inclusion and things of that nature really boil down to purpose. Some people's purpose is to go to work and get a check and do whatever the person who's cutting the check tells them to do. And if that's what their purpose defines, I would argue they don't have a purpose at all other than to be a yes man or a yes woman or yes person. But once you can identify what your purpose is, you realize your occupation is a tool with which to accomplish and achieve your purpose, not only for yourself, but for those others who you may never meet who will benefit from the fact that you, A, identified what your purpose was, and B, executed upon it.
So I would say I subscribe to therapy. I have a therapist. I go every Monday, and it's very helpful to talk to someone who is almost like a mirror. And so even when she would literally repeat stuff back to me, I'm literally saying, "What did I just say? Is that me? Like, of course, I don't show up like that." So I think it's very helpful, specifically as you start to think through your career. People say you have these midlife crises. I call them mid-career crisis, where you don't know necessarily what you want to be. You don't know your purpose. You're trying to figure it out. And what I've learned is that it's about you, right? So everybody has their career. Everybody has an idea what they potentially want to do. But I think sometimes we don't focus on how that career and that stress, both family, personal, professional, weighs on you every single day. Not knowing, if you are satisfying your parents, that your parents wanted to be a doctor, lawyer, or a politician, or record label person, or you wanted to go to school, you spend $100,000 in student loan debt, and you don't know if you're getting the right return on investment. I feel like these are conversations that are stressful, and you need someone to talk to, not your best friend, not your girlfriend, not your homeboy, not your sister, your cousin. You need someone that is professional that can actually help you work through these situations. So I personally subscribe to it. I was not a believer. It was only about 3 months ago where my roommate told me and kind of kept telling me that I needed to go, and I was wondering, were you trying to tell me something? Okay, but kept telling me, and I tried it, and I think it's the best investment in self that you can make. An investment in your mind, an investment in your mental capacity, because we all go for checkups. You talk about your physical. People run. That's my other my treasure. I run and do CrossFit. That's my other release of stress. But nobody talks about your mental stability. And believe you me, you will be nothing. You will be at value to nobody if that right there is not sane. If it's not sane, you're going to be useless to anybody that you even have a conversation with. So forgo all your goals because you're not going to make it. And so an investment in yourself is an investment. Wow.
I think just adding on to that, exercise is extremely important. I think we've all covered as well the importance of a professional getting that involved. You go to a doctor for every other part of your being. Why not go to a doctor for your headspace as well? And so that only makes sense. But then additionally, on the exercise front, you're actually engaging the same part of your brain that increases long-term memory, in the hippocampus. And so why not also look into some of the natural things that you can do in keeping your body active, keeping your mind active, and making sure that because your body is a direct reflection, your mind is a direct reflection of all of the things that you allow into it. Make sure that you're cutting off the things that are not going to produce fruit. And that means sometimes going on long fasts from social media. I mean, we're all adults in this room. You've got millions of other things that you could be doing. You don't need a platform that's essentially just trying to trigger an impulse purchase decision involved in your day-to-day life every waking minute. So that's a starting. Cut that down. Go exercise instead. And with that time, you'll find that you really start to increase the ways that you almost reward yourself. And that brings more clarity, that brings more thought to why and your purpose. Why do I do certain things? And if it doesn't give me a return on the investment of my time, then I should not be doing that. And that's where you start to find, or at least I personally have started to find some of that clarity as well online.
I'd add that it's about, with my group, my close boys, my friends that I go back to from undergrad and high school, it's about being open and having conversations with one another. So I don't mean in terms of using them as a therapist, although we certainly do that, but sharing with the dudes in the barbershop, I go see a therapist. I go see him every Tuesday. What about you? And so, and then it's also about, talking about your mind, but as an extension to that is your physical health. One of my boys, he went to the doctor for a checkup, 47, diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so they caught it early, stage 1, and it's clear now. But then all of us in the group went at our physicals. Doc, check my PSA. Doc is like, you're 42, you're good. I'm like, do it anyway. It doesn't hurt, right? And so then, and then it's all about, talking about the balance between your physical and your mental well-being. And that conversation does not happen in the Black community, especially amongst men. So we've had these conversations over dinner, over drinks, over, I have one of my boys, I have a therapist, but then he's like, I have this career coach. And I'm like, send me her number. Because I'm dealing with, certain issues and headwinds within a professional space that I need help working out, right? And it sometimes involves situations that go above and beyond what a mentor can provide to you. So it's just critically important as a Black man to take care of your mental well-being. But then all of us have most of us have really great health insurance. You work in a professional business, you have health insurance, right? Like, take advantage of it and go to the doctor. It's going to cost you a copay.
Just really quickly, so Brian said something interesting about tapping his friends and being able to, here, I'll pass it down. Talking to other men about these things, and that you are going to therapy, and that all these things are kind of new and maybe seen as taboo before. So I never really had an outlet for that. So I created a podcast to get my other guy friends to talk about these things with me, and how masculinity is changing, and what does that mean for us as like Latinos. And there's a lot of cultural taboos that we've wrestled with as well. So for me, that's an outlet. That's therapy. These conversations are super important to feeling better about your mental state and how you approach being a professional man of color, right? So that's just one thing I just wanted to share as well.
Do you want to shout out the name of the podcast?
Yeah, sorry. So the name of the podcast is the Mijos Podcast. So Mijos, well, it sounds like the Migos, which is another reason, but Mijos means sons in Spanish.
So for me, when I was growing up, I expressed myself femininely. And as a young boy, I often got ridiculed for that in the schoolyard, from my family. And so all throughout my life, I looked at masculinity as a way to not ask for help, as a way to be successful on my own, and to make sure that I can kind of be a successful person, but simply by myself. I'm really happy to see the strides that have been taken to normalize things like therapy, especially for men of color, because there have been so much stigma, both culturally and by gender norms as well, that men shouldn't ask for help, that they should be strong enough on their own. And for me, I totally get the whole health insurance thing, but actually, if you really think about therapy, it's a real privilege. Not everything is covered on your health insurance plan, okay? People like me, I use my queer fam as my therapy. So they're like 5 of my best friends, and we meet at least a few times a month, and we're always constantly texting each other about our days. If we there was one time I got yelled at by an old white woman on the subway, and it ruined my day. It really did ruin my day. And so I just vented to that group of people, my queer fam, and, we just talk to each other, we hear each other out, we listen to each other's concerns, and we uplift each other through our successes as well. And I think that community is so beyond important for you to find your community that you can talk to about anything. That's my therapy.
I know I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to add my 2 cents in here too, is that communities of color can be very, very secretive about money. We can be very, very secret squirrel about finances. Many of us in our communities, we don't know our parents' financial situation until somebody gets sick, until somebody is dying, right? And so what I would say is that our non-Hispanic white counterparts are not as secretive about money as we are, because there's a lot of ego and there's a lot of shame tied up into money and how much do I make, how much should I be making, etc. My boys and I have made a pact that we will talk about finances, full disclosure with each other, what we learned, what our mistakes have been, what we were successful in, where we got information, how we negotiated our next bonus, what we asked for in contract negotiations. And as we've progressed, the tide has definitely raised all of our boats. And I can honestly say that you need to find a tribe of people that you trust enough that you can talk about money with in your career professionally, because there are so many mistakes that we're making in terms of negotiating, not asking for what we deserve, being timid about certain aspects about compensation, not even knowing that you can ask for certain things. The last time that I negotiated a contract at a former company, I called up a guy who wasn't really a mentor, but he was in the same space, and I got really, really honest with him about what my number was. And he was like, they offered me that like 4 years ago. You should be getting more money than that. And I was like, whoa, really? I can't believe that they've tried to play me like that. You know what I mean? And so here's the part of that thing, and we're talking about self-care. Part of self-care is about building your confidence, and a lot of times confidence comes from information. You know what I mean? And confidence comes from shared experience. We should not be making the same mistakes that each other is making. So that ability to find a tribe of people that you trust is super, super important. Not just for sharing about things like here's what's going on in my family, or here's what's going on with me at work today, or did they give me all of the black interns because I'm black? You need to have a group of people outside of your office that you can have those conversations with, particularly about money. I cannot stress that enough, because we almost never have enough information about money, regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of our education, and it comes up often. I know we've got time. We only got time for one more question, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for everyone else. And I guess my last question is what does a lot of times people look to men in power to be allies for all different groups throughout the sort of spectrum of diversity and inclusion. What does allyship for you as men of color? What are your expectations for allyship as men of color? Because we ask our female counterparts a lot. We ask our counterparts who are differently abled that a lot. What do you need from allies for you as men of color moving through these spaces?
Information. Most important thing.
I would say sponsorship.
I say advocacy.
Opportunity. Just want to show myself, you know?
For me, it's visibility. I think if someone can say to me, hey, Drew, let me introduce you to these other people, access, hey, you might not have heard about this yet, but there's a position and opening up here. You know, opportunity, here's the other things on the team that, you know, you could be, that your skill set could be highly transferable for. But definitely like the information and sponsorship and mentorship. I would definitely say probably the last thing is, you talked about a career coach, which is very different from a sponsor, which is very different from a mentor. I left a company where I controlled a big checkbook and I had a really big title at the end of my name. And I recognized for the first time after I left that company that people didn't respond to my phone call and my emails as quickly at once there was not that big title and Fortune 100 company behind my name. And I had to recognize, who am I when there's nothing behind the comma, right? How important, who am I when I don't have the ability to trade on the currency of my, you know, former big checkbook, former big company. And it required me to figure out the purpose really, really fast. And I would say that if it takes a career coach, or if it takes, don't let it take a job transition for you to figure out that purpose and that mission. And so with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Back.
So my only question is that being a Black Caribbean man working in media and film specifically, is that I'm uncomfortable saying this, but I deal with a lot of being faced with, I get forced on like white culture and media, as in that I get put down for not knowing Ferris Bueller Day Off and like The Breakfast Club, but I grew up on watching Poetic Justice and The Wood and Tupac and, you know, NWA and like Boyz II Men, and like, how do I deal with that at work? Because I've seen those movies, but that's not what I remember in my childhood, because I didn't see myself in those films. So if you guys can speak on how do you handle that if you face that?
I don't know about anybody else, but I feel like that we all feel the white gaze at work incessantly. I think that's just part of corporate America. Here's the deal: is that being other in corporate America is like having a mouse and an elephant in the room together, right? The mouse has to have a PhD in elephant just to survive. We have to know every single thing about, you know, that elephant just to survive in that room, and the people and the elephant can be completely unaware that we even exist in that room, right? I think that that's changing, but it's not changed yet. And I think that part of it too is being comfortable enough in those spaces where, if you don't know all of those things, or if you've never seen an episode of Friends or Seinfeld, that that part of that is being really proud about the aspects of your culture that you bring to the table as well. Because what I can tell you is this: stand firm in the fact that you know more about what is current in culture today than anybody in that room that is quoting Seinfeld, right? Because if you don't have a multicultural strategy right now, today, that is specific, you don't have a growth strategy, because the demographics of this country are changing rapidly. We are the consumer base. We are the category creators. And so I would say stand firm in that, because you're going to be getting more questions about the things that you know intrinsically than you'll probably be getting about the other aspects.
Just to add one thing to your point, someone asked me a couple weeks ago, "Oh, what'd you do this weekend? What'd you watch last night?" I'm like, "Oh, I watched Power." Like, what's Power? I'm like, there's a billboard in Times Square. You got Ghostface on every bus and subway. And they're like, what's power? Couldn't believe it.
I usually combat it and say, I'll check it out if you check this out. And more often than not, whatever I'm telling them to check out, they've never heard of. So I'll go watch your little Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But you're going to have to watch some Boys in the Hood.
Good evening. Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Kimberly Coop King, everyone. I work, thankfully, with Brian Norris at NBCU. I listen to a lot of panels, and I am the mother of a brown boy, and I hope he one day grows to become an amazing man in this world. Earlier today, you tackled a little bit about, I love that question about all tides rise and supporting women on the journey. It made me think about the work-life balance. So many times on panels we hear women say that they never hear men get asked about their work-life balance, how they balance it all, that career and that personal. So I'd love to be the woman that asks the men, how do you balance it all? Because you're not stay-at-home husbands. I think that's something that is a reality for some women, right? And their partners choosing to be the spouse that stays at home. So how do you, on top of the wellness, I loved hearing that, but talk to me a little bit about that work-life balance and building family and how you prioritize that and the trade-offs you make.
I think anyone who's worked at a job for more than 5 years, or company for more than 5 years, is probably really good at what they do. Otherwise, they would have been out the door a long time ago. And at that point, I think it's very important in your workspace to create what are known as boundaries. So, I mean, if you're good at what you do, at a certain time, you don't respond to emails anymore. You only respond to emergencies, and you cultivate and nurture other parts of your life, and that's it. I mean, that's important not only for your family, but for your own well-being and health. Otherwise, you are effectively a slave to someone else's needs, wants, and demands.
I'd say, I have a wife, 2 kids, and fortunately for me, I really, really love my job. I really love what I do. So, I actually don't feel like I'm going to work every day. I really enjoy what I'm doing, and it doesn't feel like a burden on me. But as far as work-life balance, I have this open door policy with my team, or I should call it an open phone policy. They can call, text me. If it's a question that's going to take them 2 hours to figure out that I can answer in 2 minutes, I encourage them to do that. And what that has allowed for me is to be able to work wherever. When my daughter was 2, I missed an art fair at her school with all the finger paintings and everything. I was in Denver for a stupid meeting, and my wife FaceTimed me, and I could have cried because I wasn't there. I was in Denver for some nonsense, and I said at that point, I'm not missing one more thing, and I've set that expectation with my employer, with my boss. Like, I'm not missing something over something that's less important. But the trade-off is that I'm happy to answer questions and answer texts, but I try to be present at every single thing my kids have.
I think the underlying theme to a lot of that too, and the answers that they both just gave is it's I mean, in the best analogy I can give, it's you've got a certain amount of shares of your time that everybody is trying to get, and the more of those shares that you buy back and take ownership of, the more valuable the rest of them become. And so people will see your time as more valuable because they know that they're only going to get you for this amount of time. Sure, you could still be communicative, you could be extremely efficient, you can be effective, but if they know that all they're going to get is this from you, but you're still going to perform at a top-notch level, and they should still value you the same way, then nobody's going to come asking questions about, hey, where were you at this time? Hey, what were you doing here? Because they know that you're already producing. Your productivity is high, and you're communicating. What else can they fault you for?
So I just wanted to say, because I love your question, I feel like if I was not on the panel, I would probably ask that exact question. It's hard, and I struggle with it every single day. I don't know the answer to your question. I think what the struggle is being a young black male, one of few people in similar roles, I do feel like I have to go nonstop. I have to sacrifice both family, personal life, everything. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I love the idea, the analogy that you gave. If you can buy back more shares of your time, the other ones become more valuable. I'm still there. But I truly do not, I honestly don't know. And so, what stuck me about your question is that, when you say that you have a young, brown son and the prospects of his future and his success, he would have to answer that question. And it kind of struck me. It was just like, if I was to tell my younger self, give my younger self some advice, I would tell myself to be patient. Because I do believe I'm a spiritual person. I do believe that what God has for me is going to be for me. So I'm going to get there at one point in time. And to rush and get there so quickly, I'm not sure that I've benefited as much as I could have, because my experience is very truncated, right? So I'm still at work. I have a great job, great position, but I miss so many different steps. And I often think if I would have been a little bit more patient, I wouldn't be struggling with some of these basic questions. In my mind, I think they're basic. If I would have rose the ranks the way I should have, if I would have listened a little bit longer, if I would have accepted such and such feedback, and I wasn't so hurriesome to like, I need to get to that title. I love the comma. If I wanted to make sure, I was too busy focused on the comma after, like, what is the title that I wanted? And then what is that book, that check mark, that checkbook that I can start writing? So to answer your question from my perspective, I would say patience, because, you'll get there eventually.
So really quickly, I also have a young brown son. He's 2, and my wife is actually here as well. So I hope she would agree with everything I have to say in terms of balancing being a working dad or a working parent. So we're both working professionals. My wife has a completely different job, different industry, and so our schedules are very different. So for us, I think what helps is constant communication, because sometimes, obviously, in a true partnership, there's give and take. And so we have to be very willing, sometimes at the drop of a dime, to communicate with each other and say, like, I have something very pressing, and so we'll have to kind of step in or help each other to make sure that we can be there and be present for our son. So obviously, it's working for us. I mean, we're all very happy, and but I think it does kind of take a realization that, like, you're doing these things not just for yourself anymore, right? Like, there's other people that count on you, and so you absolutely have to be 100% dedicated in every world that you're running in.
For me, I'm a single 28-year-old male, and so I don't have a family at this point in time. But actually, balancing my time and time management has always been one of my weaknesses. And I think my second job out of college, I actually burned out because I was working too much. And that is the moment when I realized I'm putting all this effort in, and I'm not getting what I should be getting paid back. Kind of what you were talking about before, like, what is your worth? So from that moment on, I made it a goal of mine to set aside more time for myself. Like every one day a week, I have me time, Jordan time, whether it's going home to cook a meal for the week or my self-care routines, exercising. I have to set aside time for myself and my alone time. That is so paramount for me now. And another thing about time management is that it's not something that, like, you inherently know. It's learned throughout your different experiences. So like I said, like, for me to experience burnout and what it's like to work too much and not get what you should be getting in return, that was the moment in time where I was like, the switch went off and I needed to make a change.
Can I say something to that though as well? Is that one of the things that is really interesting is that one, all of my male employees were much better at negotiating boundaries than my female employees were. So let me just say that to the room, because they're both men and women in the room right now. I've managed teams of women since I was 25 years old, and the men that worked for me were much better at negotiating boundaries than the women were. So that's a shout out to women in the room. I know this is a male panel, but that being deliberate and intentional about that and being firm in that is something that almost very few of the women that I employed did really, really well, and the men were pretty definitive in most instances. I'll say the other thing about time management, about work-life balance is about 2 years ago, I had done all this amazing work, had done all of these crazy things for a company that I used to work for, and I got to the point where we were going over my review, and I was getting my bonus number, and I got my standard bonus number, right? And I had done all these crazy things. I'd like made all these crazy numbers happen, had done all this extra stuff. And I had a conversation with my boss at the time, and I love her to death. We had literally had lunch today. She's not my boss anymore. And I said, listen, I did this. I got on a plane to go here. I flew there at the last minute and then flew back. I didn't go home for my cousin's birthday for this, and this. And I didn't want to say this to her, but I also was like, and I gained 20 pounds last year doing this work, right? Because I was on the road all the time. I was in airports. And she said something to me that changed the way I've thought about work ever since, right? She said, nobody asked you to do that. And so when you said I was doing all of this work, I was working all these hours, I saw all of these people in the back just nodding their head like, yeah, like I'm working all the time. And what I'll say to you is you need to be very, I will always overperform and outperform the next person when it comes to what I am asked to do. But I'm going to be very specific and intentional about my contract with work, right? Is to make sure that I overperform on the things that I am asked to do. But before I do all of those other things that I've not been asked to do, I'm going to understand what I get in return for that before I do it, and not as opposed to after I have already done it, right? And I think that that's part of that work-life balance, is that to keep in mind that we are culturally trained that we've got to be 10 times better to get half as much. We've got to work 5 times harder. We've got to show up and look busy all the time because we want to defy the lazy stereotype or the whatever the stereotype is. And what I'm saying is that that's a lot of labor that you are not getting paid for, right? So you need to be really, really clear about sometimes when you're in that office doing all of this extra stuff, did anybody ask me to do this? Is this the expectation? What is the expectation for me to get this done? And then I get it done successfully. What am I getting for that other than the company thanks you for your time? Right. If you get that, right. So I know you had a question.
Fellas, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with me. My name is Kevin Ajakwa. I'm a public relations associate over at Understood, which is a social impact organization that is geared towards helping kids, families, educators in the workplace, serving those who have learning and thinking differences. So following up on your question about, I think we're talking about finances and we're talking about just about the importance of money. How do we, take advantage of our uniqueness? And I think you brought up a point in the question I wanted to ask you is, how do we tangibly, monetize our uniqueness? And I'll give you an example. I'll use myself as an example. Currently I'm a PR associate, but if you look at what I do Understood, I do more than just PR. I had to actually create a diversity and inclusion team internally and externally, and one for the marketing group, which unfortunately took away time from me doing the work that I was supposed to do, that I was hired to do as a PR professional. And the privilege that our counterparts have is that they can come in. If you're hired to do tech, you can do tech. But if you're a black person working in tech, you have to focus on doing tech, as well as teaching chief marketing officers, directors, senior members on how it's like to market to people of color. You're a junior and you're like a very junior in the company. So how do we tangibly go into the rooms, especially for junior folk, to say, hey, if I'm gonna do this work on top of what I've been hired here to do, compensation, how do I how does that look? Because again, as you alluded to, you're doing all this work, but for what for? But how do we tangibly take advantage, since, as you alluded to, within our communities, most of us are the first in our families to get degrees, jobs. Money is very much important towards building generational wealth, but in order for us to even do that, we have to be good at the table in terms of negotiating. So,
if you don't mind me asking, I don't know if you answer, how old are you?
25.
I think one of the advantages that you have that people who are 35 plus didn't have when they were 25 is the ability to market your skill set. So I'm of the thinking that with a lot of responsibility comes a lot of freedom. So if you find yourself training people in other areas, then maybe you should offer your services training people in other areas outside of the company you work for at this time. Some people may say, okay, well, won't you find another company where your responsibilities can be a little bit more targeted? I think if people are calling on you for other assignments, then either they're trying to exploit you or they're trying to exploit you, and now it's about how you respond to that exploitation. Are you going to utilize that exploitation in order to grow within that organization, create your own organization, or find another organization where you'll be reasonably compensated for your investment?
I think in showing them the amount of time it's going to take to do something else as well, where those hours are coming from, what you're putting it towards, the value that they're trying to get out of it, and marry that with, again, compensation, what you're looking for. Because companies, even though they might not put more dollars in front of you, on every scenario at least, they'll say, okay, well, if you're going to put this amount of time into it, you can say, all right, well, look, I need, a day off, another day off or something like that. I need to have this type of benefit. I need to, and you can rationale your way into figuring out what that compensation looks like, especially if you're showing them the hard numbers of, all right, this is the additional amount of hours you want me to put into this project on top of what I'm already doing. And that means that I'm going to have to sacrifice this part of my personal life, my balance, to offer something up to a company that I don't own. So
I'll just quickly add I agree with what my colleagues have said. It's just also thinking about compensation a little bit more broadly as well. So it's not all monetary. So there may be, while you're actually training other folks, you may get exposure to a different side of the business, or you may get exposure, you may be able to show your skill set to a senior exec that you're presenting on the marketing strategy. And that may be beneficial long term. So I would just add that in there because I think, as I was answering the young lady's question before, patience, when I think about my career, I'm 30, so I'm not far from you either. I think I was so focused on trying to get compensated monetarily for what I was doing that, again, I missed all the opportunities. When I look back, I was like, dang, I was in front of X, Y, and Z. Why? I missed out on that opportunity because I was like, no, if you're going to make me present in front of the mayor or et cetera, like I need to be at this level because everybody else around the table talking to the mayor, they're commissioner level above. So I need to get up some, right? I can't be presenting in front of the mayor and I'm a policy analyst. That doesn't make sense. And so I would just oftentimes think of it a little bit broadly. Not that you're not, but that would be my advice.
I'd say, and this happens all the time with teams that I've managed. People come to me, they're like, Brian, can we talk? All right, I know this conversation's going to be about. They're like, yeah, open door, like, and I'm happy to have it. And they're just like, listen, like, I've done this, done X, Y, and Z, all these things, I would like a raise. And the next question that I ask them, 9 times out of 10, they're not prepared to answer. The question's very simple. What do you want? Just not prepared to answer that. Because they were waiting for me to say, you know what, you're right. You're going to get a 20% raise. But if I told them they're going to get a 20% raise, they'll be like, why not 25%? Right? So be prepared with what you want. Right? And so it's happened in my career. I've gone above and beyond. I've asked for raises I've asked for more at my company. And when the boss says, what do you want? For me, I don't necessarily first go for cash. I'll go for equity in the company. And if that's not on the table, I asked my previous employer to pay for school, and they paid for business school. So it's just like be prepared with what you want.
Just gonna say, write all that down and make sure that you are putting all your activities as like things that are helping you achieve your business goals, your growth at the company for the next position, because you're already doing it. So now you can show I've already done these things, and then it helps you once you get to that next step.
If I could quickly add, make sure that if you don't have goals written down already with your key stakeholders, write them down. Set them for the year and make sure you track them throughout the year, because that's when you say, hey, look at all I've done. against my goals. This is why I deserve a promotion, and this is why I deserve more money. To your point, like in having that number in mind when you go into that meeting.
Not even just having a number in mind. I would also say too that a lot of us talk about having a mentor, having a sponsor, and all that sort of thing, or having people, engage us at work at a higher level. I would say we all should know that if a senior level person came up to you and said, "Hey, how can I help you? What do you need to progress in your career?" If anyone at your company walked up to you and asked you that today, would you have an answer? And for many of us, we don't have a specific answer, but that opportunity comes, you should know it right then and there. Oh, this is what I need. This is what I think would be really, really helpful. They may redirect that. They may tell you something totally different. They may say, "Well, I can't help you with that, but I can point you in the direction if you can." But you should know that as well, because you never know. Have a conversation could definitely change the trajectory of your career. I know you had a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I wish my business partner was here, my son, everybody. They need to hear this. I'm going to backtrack to earlier in the panel. You guys were talking about what can we do to kind of mentor and do things further and help those who are underneath us. It's 7 professionals sitting up here. Besides what you do at work, do any of you have your own organizations? Do any of you have your own mentorship companies, businesses? Do you partner with other organizations? I mean, the reason why I ask that question is because I'm a avid lover and fan of hip hop. So my partner, who I was talking about, I wish he was here because this was just his. My best friend since we were 13, and we went to junior high together. We were sitting down talking about hip hop to our children. They were like, who, what, where? It drove us crazy. Not about the music, but about the culture, about the history, about where it came from. And then when we began to talk to their friends, we realized that this is a significant part of who we are, not in a stereotypical way of how things are being, presented through media, but how we grew up in it and what we know about it. There were so many positives. So we created a company called Vital Grounds Media. We both work full-time. We both have other existing hobbies and businesses. I'm a multipreneur times 3 in addition to my 9 to 5 with 3 kids. And I have a very healthy work-life balance. But I felt the need to educate and give back. And I hear a lot of men, I talk to a lot of men about the things that they want to see, but I never hear them saying what they're doing to actually give back. So what are you guys doing to actually, outside of your jobs?
Question. So I'll start. I'll say, I do there are 2 things that I'm really passionate about. Number one, when I got into this business in 1999, it was due to a nonprofit called the IRTS, and I got in through the IRTS. And I've been on their board for about the last 10 years. I'm now vice chairman of their board, and I host a number of summer fellows throughout the year, so from a mentorship standpoint. But then, there was more that was needed. Back to my point of helping people of color mid-level, to get to that mid-management level. So I started like super grassroots, a group. It's not even formally named, but a group of men, and Brian's a part of it as well here. So we do just get brothers together in media, and we just have dinner, right? We have dinner, and it's grown from 10 brothers sitting around a table to 30 brothers, and it was 30 brothers when I got to NBCU. I got a call from our chief diversity officer, and he's like, "Hey, I heard you're here. I want to meet you." So we meet, and he says, "Executives in the company say they don't hire black people because they don't know any." And I'm like, well, that's complete bullshit. Because I know I have 30 brothers that we host for dinner once a quarter. And he's like, "Can I come?" And I'm like, "Yes, you're black, so you're in." So then he shows up to dinner, and he's like, I talked to, and he reports directly into CEO of NBCU, Steve Burke. He's like, "I've talked to Burke about this group. just so you know, NBCU is going to pay for it in perpetuity. And so it's grown. At that point, it was about 30 people. Now it's grown to about 80 people, or 80 men. And we did an event just, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, where we included sisters. It was an event, Kim was there. It was about 120 brothers and sisters sharing, getting together, and ultimately, like, it was important to me because we were helping people get jobs, right, and get mid-level, back to the original purpose, mid-level to senior executive jobs, and Kim was a great example of that.
And I'm just looking for quick tips for the room in general. The conversation is about overcoming barriers through the power of inclusion. And I feel as a journalist that inclusion is like a buzz phrase for right now. Like, it's the hot ticket item. We're doing this. So how can people in the room actually maximize their actual opportunities in this buzzword phrase time that we're living in? Because 20 years ago, I never heard diversity and inclusion. And so just quick tips for people in the room that want to navigate in these spaces where systemic racism is ever present, to really get where they want to go, since it is like the thing that people are investing in, like the dinners and the conversations.
Make yourself uncomfortable. When I say make yourself uncomfortable, send that email to that CEO or CMO of that company that you would be afraid to otherwise send a note to, right? Send a note to people on LinkedIn. Just make yourself uncomfortable and reach out and I say make yourself uncomfortable and make yourself vulnerable. There's nothing wrong with being vulnerable and asking for help. Because what I found is that most executives are incredibly busy, but most want to help.
Make a compelling case in the language of business. I think far too many of the inclusion and diversity conversations are too warm and fuzzy and feel goody. And that's just not the language of business. You need to, come armed with data, come armed with statistics so that you can make a compelling case for the business rationale. I think that's incredibly helpful as well.
To the moderator's point, I don't like the word inclusion. Honestly, I read a book 2 summers ago called Shades of Glory, and I think it's about baseball. It's about Negro League baseball. I'll make this as fast as I can. And I think a lot of us, it's Black History Month, we learn about Jackie Robinson, how great he was, he integrated. But Jackie Robinson was also, in all deference, and this is the first thing that comes to mind, was a test dummy or litmus or a canary in the mine to see how to incorporate black talent within white structures or non-black structures. That's as politically as correct as I could get on a dot, because I had something else to say. So when I say overcoming barriers through the power of inclusion, how about overcoming barriers through the power of ownership? And one thing we all own is our ability to complete tasks, to have a vision, to push the needle for the corporations for which we work. So the brother here spoke about the dinner that he has. That's really overcoming barriers through ownership. He created a dinner, and now he's leveraging what his employer has in order to create opportunity because he owns something. So look at your talents and look at your drive and purpose as something that you own in order to create other opportunities for others and also to solidify, some people may say seat at the table, or create your own table in order to create opportunities that wouldn't otherwise exist for you or others.
I would just say take advantage of the moment that it is, and specifically talking to folks that are entrepreneurial in mindset, so supplier diversity. So MWBE, get certified, take advantage of these programs that are giving out free capital, free startup loans, very, very low interest loans to start your business up. So when you have this great idea, start a business out of it. You said that you own 3 businesses. That's great. I would love to see if the city could partner with you in anything that you're doing. And so that to me is just take advantage of the moment. I know. Let's do it. Let's do it. And then the last thing I would just say is the city is doing a lot with ethnic media, right? So the mayor has committed to spending a lot more money in marketing city services to the residents, because his goal is to make sure the residents, make sure that the services are attracted to the folks that actually use them. And so we're looking at opportunities to partner with folks in the community so that we can spend money, so that we can advertise to targeted communities. So if that's of interest, specifically because folks work in media, my brother back there was talking about his business. Like, let's see if we can do business and see if we can kind of create this together and live in the moment.
Ask your advocacy groups to hold those companies accountable, right? Like a lot of times we have not because we ask not, we demand not, right? So if you have an advocacy group in the community, then you're advocating. You don't want to be the one to say, well, I know y'all said we were going to have this many black executives or Hispanic executives or whatever, but we don't have them yet. You don't have to carry that water. If an advocacy group in your industry or in your space is doing that, have the advocacy group write a letter to the heads of those organizations and say, what is your inclusion plan? We'd like to hear it based on the numbers we saw last year and this year. And it can come from the organization. That way, me, my lowly self at the office doesn't have to be the person that says, why y'all say we're going to get these numbers and we didn't. Advocacy groups need to be advocating, right? And so if we look at, I can speak, it's Black History Month, so I'm going to talk about just the African American example, is that, we have all said, what are governments or administrations, what have they done for African American communities, right? But our LGBTQ counterparts are putting forward policy saying, we want these things from this administration in exchange for our support and our votes, right? Advocacy groups should be holding organizations accountable. And sometimes advocacy groups are the NAACP, sometimes advocacy groups are NAMIC, right? You have the authority to ask for more, to ask for better. There is nothing wrong with saying to an organization, what you have given me is good, but it is not enough. Advocacy groups have to hold these organizations accountable because that's the power in numbers, right? We have not because we ask not. Promising this woman right here in front of me that we are going to answer her question, okay? So we're not leaving until she gets her question answered, okay?
Hey, how you doing? I'm Brian Lee, Vice President at Dentsu Programmatic. Before I ask the question, I just wanted to go back to this guy right here because I think it's a problem for a lot of people that I see in terms of wanting the promotion. I think we have to be more intentional about our growth plan and what we want to do, mapping that out. We also need to make sure we socialize what we're doing to other people. So I think, especially at your level and at mid-manager and entry level, you're going to run across a lot of bad managers. And what you don't want to do is leave your career up to your direct manager. So you need to socialize your work to other key players in your department, in your organization, and start to look for those projects that will help impact the organization. And also, I know he said map it to goals, but not just map it to your goals. You need to map it towards business goals and create a story. And so I think that's a lot of issues. I think a lot of people have those issues. And I try to help and, talk to people about that. And I'm trying to put together something formalized, as sort of a plan of action, because I feel like I've cracked the code now. So how can I help get that out to people? But we need to be intentional. And it really goes back to everything. It goes back to the work-life balance, being intentional, being proactive if you know work is coming, getting ahead of it, and then talking to your manager about expectations so that it's not 6 o'clock and then someone's coming with you something to you with a project they want done. I need it in the day. Now to my question, I had in terms of at the executive level, mid to executive level, can you provide some advice in terms of partnering with women of color and trying to, because I've had I've had struggles trying to make that connection with women of color. The one thing I do is I just go around whoever I see, you black or man, woman, at any level. I'm trying to connect with you, see if I can help, if there's things I can help, and definitely entry level, mid level, definitely receptive. We start to get into the higher ranks. Sometimes I've had difficulty with trying to get women to either open it up. In certain cases, people, I guess, have felt uncomfortable maybe having other people see them with another black person, which I think is odd. But I just want to get your advice on that.
Yeah, it happens. There are some people that I've worked with, people of color, they don't want to be, in the black group, because they feel like they're gonna be judged for that. The way I look at it is, if you have achieved a certain level of political capital within your organization, people start to recognize that. People start to recognize, okay, he's making change, right? Or she is making change within the organization. Then they want to like attach themselves to that. So I think it really comes with, as a person who wants to be a change agent within an organization, having a certain level of political capital. And by the way, political capital can also be tied to business results. So I get the attention all the way up through, senior people in our organization, because my team produces great business results. If we didn't produce great business results, everything would be, forgotten, right? So it's really about, having that political capital and really talking to people, and you want to partner with people, in this instance, women of color, about successes that you've had in your career, right? And finding a storyline that's relatable to them, right? But at the end of the day, you can't force someone to be interested in whatever you think the agenda should be, right? I think there kind of needs to be a two-way street there. But I think if you're able to have the political capital within the organization, put wings on the board, you've had to achieve a certain level of success, I think people will gravitate to you or others in the organization.
I also think political capital shouldn't be limited to the place where you work. A lot of times fostering relationships with people outside of your job in other industries can help you accomplish what it is you want to do internally or even externally.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina Brown and I counsel Fortune 500 clients at BCW Global. We're the world's third largest communications firm. One of the biggest challenges facing my clients today is the lack of inauthentic storytelling, along with the lack of diversity in media. So what does that look like? We have nationwide newsrooms. Only 7% of African Americans are represented in newsroom staff, yet 1 in 3 African Americans say that local media is their trusted source of news. There's a significant disconnect that then parlays into the reporting and the coverage that comes out. We saw this over the weekend when the TikTok renegade dance was attributed to a white Caucasian girl from Norwalk, Connecticut, instead of the African-American girl Jayla in Atlanta. This was course corrected from black media, but it was too little too late. She was able to get a feature in the New York Times a month after the fact. So how can we bridge the gap to ensure that our storytelling remains accurate and authentic this year and beyond? Thank you.
Support black media.
Double down on black media. PR people sometimes act like black media does not exist, right? They will pass by black media on the red carpet when they have entertainers. They will create entire plans that don't include black radio when 92% of African Americans get news from black radio. Black radio is still the #1 way to reach African American consumers, and African American consumers drive markets. I think doubling down on and including black media in advertising plans across the board too, because our media needs to survive so that someone is there actually telling our stories. The other piece I would say too is black journalists, put them at the top of your list. And go to NABJ. That's #1, because at NABJ you get black journalists that are at black outlets as well as the other quote unquote mainstream general market outlets. Black media needs to be getting the scoops and the stories so that they can feed into the larger narrative for more black media.
Wholeheartedly agree, and just to add on to it, because I mean, from what I've experienced so far, and I started out in a very different business, but then as I got into media more thoroughly and got into the role that I'm in now, it was all about the relationships that you had with not necessarily the company, but the PR agency that they were working with. And if they didn't like you, then you weren't going to get opportunities with the company more. And so to add on to what Drew was saying, for PR agencies, for investor relations agencies, for them to put us at the top of their list so that we can also speak to our communities and beyond. It's not just our communities that are listening to us. It's, so many different backgrounds that are going to hear our voice. And when they finally do, because we're going to tell it in a way that they can assimilate to how we are delivering that news. I'm not just going to say, hey, yeah, let's talk about the profit loss margins on your company, because that's that may resound with one part of the business or one part of the landscape, but you've got to think of all of the new money that's out there that want to hear about a company's story. How are they going to have a story from this company hit them and resonate and still stay with them when they get on the subway and they go to work? And then is it going to stay in the back of their minds? And if it's not delivered in a way that is something that they can take with them along their journey, then they're going to discount that company at the end of the day. So I think we do a really good job of that.
Looks like that was our last question. Can everybody thank our panel for tonight?
So good, so good. Thank you guys so much. This is the first time that we've done an all-male panel. And as you can see, there's a great need for this. You guys were amazing, excellent. Thank you for all the information. Guys, we have about maybe 10 minutes in the room. You can network and speak to the panel if you are able to get up to them. But again, I just want to give them another round of applause and say thank you so much. So good.